Jimin closes Jungkook's eyes by the lake at dawn. When opened, one confession makes the air feel too thin to breathe. At dawn by a silent lake, Jimin's confession shatters Jungkook's reality, unraveling buried truths, fear, and a love that feels impossible to survive. Don't open them, no matter what you hear. Jungkook's breath hitched as Jimin's palms pressed over his eyes, warm and trembling, shutting out the fragile dawn breaking over the lake. The world narrowed to the scent of damp pine, cold mist kissing his skin, and the uneven rhythm of Jimin's breathing, too fast, too shallow, like he had run here with something chasing him that no one else could see. The water lapped softly against the shore. Somewhere in the fog, a lone bird cried, a thin, grieving sound that seemed to slice through the stillness. "Jimin," Jungkook whispered, forcing steadiness into his voice, "you're scaring me." A pause, the kind that stretches time into something fragile and breakable. "I know," Jimin said. His voice cracked. That was what frightened Jungkook most. Jimin Park never let his voice break. He was the one who held everyone else together, the quiet gravity in a room, the steady hand on Jungkook's shoulder after nightmares, the soft laugh that made even the worst days feel survivable. For years, Jungkook had trusted that constancy the way sailors trust the horizon. But now his hands were shaking. The mist thickened around them, curling like pale smoke over the surface of the lake. Jungkook felt the dampness seep through his shoes, the cold biting into his toes, anchoring him to the present even as dread crept up his spine. "Why here?" Jungkook asked. "Why now?" Jimin's thumbs shifted slightly against his temples, a nervous habit Jungkook knew well. He used to do that before exams, before performances, before confessing small fears he never showed the world. "I needed you to listen," Jimin said, "without seeing me, without judging what you think you see." "I would never judge you." Another pause, longer this time. He could almost hear the words Jimin wasn't saying, hovering in the mist between them. "You already did." The thought came unbidden, sharp and wrong. Jungkook swallowed. The lake smelled of algae and wet stone. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air, like the aftertaste of rain or blood. He frowned, trying to place it. "Do you remember," Jimin asked softly, "the first time we came here?" Jungkook did. Of course he did. They were 15. The world had still been small enough to fit inside their shared laughter. They'd skipped class, run through the forest, and collapsed at the lake's edge, breathless and invincible. Jimin had dared him to swim in the freezing water. Jungkook had done it without hesitation because Jimin was watching. Because Jimin always watched him like he mattered. "You said the lake kept secrets," Jungkook murmured. Jimin's fingers tightened. "It does," he said. "That's why I brought you back." The metallic scent grew stronger. Jungkook's heart began to pound. "Jimin," he said carefully, "what aren't you telling me?" A shudder ran through the hands covering his eyes. For a moment, Jungkook thought Jimin might pull away, might abandon whatever this strange ritual was, and laugh it off. Instead, he leaned closer. Jungkook felt Jimin's forehead rest briefly against the back of his head, a fleeting touch, like a goodbye disguised as comfort. "I lied to you," Jimin whispered. The words fell into the mist and seemed to vanish. Jungkook's throat tightened. "About what?" "About that night," Jimin said, "the night me and you disappeared." The name struck like a dropped stone, sending ripples through memories Jungkook had tried to bury. Police lights flashing through trees, whispered rumors at school, Minu's empty desk, Jimin's quiet insistence that they hadn't seen anything, hadn't been near the lake. Jungkook's pulse roared in his ears. "You said we left before sunset," he said slowly. "We didn't." The mist shifted. Jungkook heard something soft, dragging like fabric pulled over wet sand. "Jimin," he breathed, panic sharpening his voice. "What's that sound?" "Don't open your eyes." "I need to see." "You don't." The words were almost a plea. Jungkook froze. Beneath Jimin's palms, darkness pressed in, heavy and suffocating. His lungs felt tight, the air too thin, as if the world itself were holding its breath. "Why are your hands shaking?" Jungkook asked. "Because if you see it," Jimin said, "you'll never look at me the same way again." The dragging sound stopped. Silence flooded in, thick, unnatural. Jungkook's heart hammered against his ribs, each beat louder than the last. His mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the one before. "You're hurting me," he whispered, not physically, but in the way fear fractures trust. Jimin's hands faltered. For a fraction of a second, light seeped through his fingers, pale gold dawn breaking over the lake. And then Jimin spoke, the confession tearing out of him like something alive. "I was the last person Minyu saw alive." The words hollowed the air. Jimin's hands slid away. Cold morning light flooded Jungkook's vision. The lake stretched before him, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting a sky bruised with early dawn. Mist clung to the water in thin veils. At the shoreline, half submerged in the shallows, lay a rusted bicycle. Minyu's bicycle. Jungkook's breath left him in a thin, broken gasp. The world tilted, sound draining away until all he could hear was the frantic rush of his own heartbeat. He turned to Jimin. Jimin stood rigid, eyes red-rimmed, lips bloodless, as if he'd been holding this moment inside his chest for years, and it had finally torn him open. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Jimin said, voice barely audible. "I thought I could carry it alone. I thought, if I protected you from the truth, you'd never have to hate me." The mist curled around them like a closing curtain. Jungkook tried to breathe, but the air felt too thin, too sharp, cutting into his lungs with every inhale. In that fragile dawn, beside a lake that kept secrets, Jungkook realized that love was not the safe harbor he'd believed it to be. It was an ocean, and he was already drowning. Jungkook staggered back from the water's edge, the cold mud sucking at his shoes as if the earth itself wanted to hold him there and force him to look, really look, at the truth rising from the lake like a corpse refusing to stay buried. "You're lying," he said, but the words came out thin, brittle, already breaking. This is some kind of sick joke." Jimin didn't move. Dawn light revealed everything mercilessly, the tremor in his hands, the mud smeared across his jeans, the crescent-shaped cuts along his knuckles like he'd clawed at something that fought back. His chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven pulls, each breath sounding like it hurt. "I wish it were a joke," Jimin whispered. Jungkook's gaze snapped back to the bicycle half-submerged in the shallows. Rust ate through the frame. One wheel turned slowly in the water, nudged by the gentlest ripple, squeaking in a rhythm that felt obscene in the silence. "You told me we left before dark," Jungkook said, voice rising. "You told the police we never saw him. You stood next to me and lied." "I stood next to you and protected you." The words landed like a slap. "Protected me," Jungkook barked a hollow laugh. "From what, Jimin, the truth or you?" Jimin flinched. For a moment, anger flashed through his exhaustion, sharp and bright. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to carry it alone while you slept peacefully every night?" "I didn't sleep peacefully," Jungkook shouted. The sound shattered the fragile quiet, sending birds scattering from the trees. "I had nightmares for years. I saw his face every time I closed my eyes, and you let me believe we were innocent." The lake seemed to hold its breath with them. Jimin stepped closer. "You were innocent. Stop saying that like it absolves you." "It doesn't," Jimin said, voice raw. "Nothing does." A gust of wind skimmed the lake, slicing through Jungkook's damp clothes. He wrapped his arms around himself, but the cold was inside him now, spreading through his chest like frost. "Tell me what happened," he said, each word forced out. "No more half-truths, no more protecting me. I want the truth, even if it destroys everything." Jimin closed his eyes. For a long moment, Jungkook thought he might refuse, might retreat behind the same walls he'd hidden behind for years. Instead, he spoke. "We argued," Jimin said, Minyu and I, he found out about us. Jungkook's stomach dropped. The word hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. Azu. He said he'd tell everyone, Jimin continued. Your parents, my parents, the school, he said people like us didn't deserve to hide. Jungkook's pulse roared in his ears. So you fought him? I tried to make him understand, Jimin said, shaking his head. I told him it wasn't his secret to tell, that if he cared about you, about either of us, he'd keep his mouth shut. And he didn't. No. The wind picked up, stirring the mist into frantic shapes. He grabbed my phone, Jimin said he'd send the messages to everyone himself. I tried to take it back. He shoved me, I shoved him. It wasn't supposed to. His voice broke. Jungkook's hands curled into fists. Wasn't supposed to what? Jimin's gaze drifted to the lake. He slipped, he whispered. The rocks were wet. He hit his head on the edge. The world seemed to tilt again. Jungkook pictured it with brutal clarity, the slick stones, the sudden loss of balance, the sickening crack. His breath came faster, matching the frantic rhythm of his heart. And then he forced out. I thought he was unconscious, Jimin said. I knelt beside him, I tried to wake him. There was blood, so much blood. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Jungkook's voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. You called for help. Jimin didn't answer. A terrible understanding spread through Jungkook's chest. You didn't call for help, he said, horror blooming. Why didn't you call for help, Jimin? I heard voices, Jimin said. People hiking on the trail. If they saw us, if they saw him, everything would come out. Our messages, our photos, you would have been dragged into it. Your family, your future, everything would have burned. So you let him die, Jungkook's voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know if he was dead, Jimin cried, tears spilling over. I told myself he'd wake up, that someone else would find him. I told myself 1,000 lies because the truth was too big and I was too afraid. The wind howled through the trees, a low, grieving sound. Jungkook felt something inside him fracture. You left him there, he said. You left him to drown in his own blood and secrets. Jimin's knees buckled and he sank into the mud. I left because I loved you, he choked. Because I was a coward. Because I thought if I could keep you safe, maybe one good thing would survive the wreckage. Silence crashed down between them. Jungkook stared at the boy he had trusted more than anyone, the boy who had memorized the way he took his coffee, who hummed him to sleep during thunderstorms, who had just confessed to abandoning someone to die. Love twisted in his chest, jagged and unrecognizable. You don't get to call that love, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin flinched as if struck. You don't get to decide who lives with the truth and who gets buried with it, Jungkook continued, voice shaking. You took that choice from me, from him, from everyone. I know, Jimin whispered. That's why I brought you here. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Jimin reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a small, mud-streaked object. A phone. Cracked screen, water damage. The case Jungkook remembered, Minyu's favorite band sticker peeling at the edges. I found it yesterday, Jimin said. The water must have shifted the mud. It was wedged between the rocks. Jungkook's breath hitched. Does it still? I charged it, Jimin said. One video survived. The lake seemed to darken. Jungkook's pulse pounded so hard it hurt. What's on it? Jimin looked at him, eyes hollow. Proof. The word echoed. Of the fall, Jungkook asked. Jimin swallowed. Of what happened after. A chill sharper than the morning air sliced through Jungkook's spine. What did you do? He whispered. Jimin's lips trembled. I tried to stop the bleeding. I pressed my hands against his head. I kept telling him to wake up. And then. He couldn't finish. Jungkook stepped closer, voice trembling with dread. And then what, Jimin? Jimin's gaze shattered. He opened his eyes, he said. He looked at me, and he asked me not to let him die alone. The world went silent. Jungkook felt the air vanish from his lungs, the dawn light turning harsh and unreal. The lake, the trees, the sky, all of it seemed to recede, leaving only the unbearable weight of that moment suspended between them. "And you left anyway," Jungkook said, the words barely sound. Jimin's sob was soundless. "I ran," he admitted. "I ran because I was afraid that if I stayed, I would choose him over you, and I hated myself for even thinking that." The confession shattered something final. Jungkook staggered back, hands trembling. Rage, grief, love, betrayal, each emotion crashed into the next, leaving him gasping in the wreckage. "You didn't trust me to stand with you," he said. "You decided I was too weak to face the truth. I decided you deserved a life untouched by my mistake. You don't get to decide what I deserve." His shout echoed across the lake, raw and broken. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sun crept higher, burning away the mist, exposing the shoreline in unforgiving detail. The bicycle, the rocks, the place where blood had once soaked into the earth. Jungkook's chest ached with every breath. "What do you want from me now?" he asked finally, voice hollow. Jimin looked up, eyes swollen but steady for the first time that morning. "I'm turning myself in," he said. The words landed with a strange, quiet finality. "I brought you here because you deserved the truth from me before you heard it from anyone else," Jimin continued. "I brought you here because I couldn't carry this alone anymore. And because, if you never want to see me again, I wanted the last thing you remember to be the truth, not the lie I hid behind." Jungkook stared at him, the boy he loved, and the stranger he no longer recognized, occupying the same fragile body. The air still felt too thin to breathe. But this time, he forced himself to inhale. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the truth, at last, had surfaced, and there was no drowning it again. The police sirens didn't wail. They hummed. A low, distant vibration that crept through the trees like an approaching storm, barely audible at first, then unmistakable. Jungkook heard it before Jimin did, or maybe Jimin heard it and chose not to react. They stood by the lake, the morning now fully awake, sunlight cutting through the last threads of mist. The bicycle lay exposed, pathetic and accusatory, its rusted frame glinting like a wound that had never healed. "You called them," Jungkook said. "It wasn't a question." Jimin nodded once, slow and deliberate, "Before I woke you up." Something twisted in Jungkook's chest. "So this was never about telling me, this was about saying goodbye." "It was about not lying anymore," Jimin replied, "even if the truth costs me everything." "Everything," Jungkook echoed, voice sharp. "You say that like I'm not part of that cost." Jimin's jaw tightened. "You're the only reason I lasted this long." The words struck harder than any accusation. Jungkook let out a breath that shook. "You don't get to make me your reason for surviving something you never let me face." "Would you have stayed?" Jimin shot back, sudden heat in his voice. "If I'd told you that night, if you'd seen the blood, heard him begging, would you have stayed with me while he died? Or would you have run too?" Jungkook flinched. The question landed in the exact place he feared most. "I don't know," he admitted. Silence swallowed them. For the first time since the confession, they were standing in the same uncertainty. Jimin laughed bitterly. "Exactly, I didn't know either, and I couldn't risk finding out that the person I loved would look at me like I was a monster." Jungkook's hands trembled. "You think I'm not looking at you like that now?" Jimin's gaze dropped to the mud between them. "You have every right to." The sirens grew louder. Through the trees, flashes of blue light began to pulse, muted by branches and distance. Time, which had felt suspended at the lake's edge, lurched back into motion. Jungkook's pulse raced. "We still have time," he said suddenly. "You don't have to do this." Jimin looked up sharply. "Don't." "Listen to me," Jungkook insisted, stepping closer. "It was an accident. You panicked. You were a kid. People make mistakes, terrible mistakes, but that doesn't mean you deserve to lose your entire life. I already lost it, Jimin said quietly, the moment I ran. No, Jungkook said, grabbing his wrist. You lost it the moment you decided you had to carry this alone. Jimin stared at Jungkook's hand on his skin, as if memorizing the contact. You're shaking, Jungkook whispered. So are you. Their breaths mingled in the cold morning air, visible, fragile. Run with me, Jungkook said. The words shocked even him. Jimin's eyes widened. What? We leave, Jungkook continued, voice gaining urgency. We disappear, start somewhere no one knows us. You said you did this to protect me. Let me protect you now. That's not protection, that's another lie. It's survival. It's cowardice, Jimin countered, but his voice wavered. Jungkook tightened his grip. You think turning yourself in will bring him back. You think destroying yourself will make this right. No, Jimin said, but it will make it honest. The sirens were close now, tires crunching gravel, doors slamming in the distance, voices faint, authoritative. Jungkook's heart slammed against his ribs. If you go with them, they'll tear you apart. The media, the trial, everyone who ever smiled at you, they'll turn you into a headline, a villain. They'll erase everything good about you. Maybe they should, Jimin said. Maybe that's the price. Jungkook's voice broke. And what about me? What am I supposed to do with the part of my life that is you? The question hung between them, raw and unguarded. Jimin's composure cracked. Tears spilled freely now, carving clean paths through the dirt on his cheeks. Forget me, he whispered. Live the life I was too afraid to risk. I don't want a life that pretends you never existed, Jungkook said. I want the truth, even if it ruins me. Footsteps approached through the trees. A voice called out, distant but unmistakable. Hello, anyone there? Jimin closed his eyes. This is it, he murmured. Jungkook's grip tightened painfully. Don't go. I have to. Then say it, Jungkook demanded, desperation sharpening his tone. Say you don't love me anymore. Make it easier to let you go. Jimin's eyes flew open, horror and grief colliding. Don't ask me to lie again. Then tell me the truth. The officers' figures emerged between the trees, silhouettes in dark uniforms, moving with cautious purpose. Jimin looked at Jungkook like he was memorizing him, the curve of his mouth, the fear in his eyes, the way his hand refused to let go. I love you, Jimin said. The words were soft, but they hit like thunder. And that's why I'm letting you hate me, he added. Jungkook's chest heaved. I don't hate you, I don't know how to. Good, Jimin whispered, because I hate myself enough for both of us. The officers were only meters away now. Sir, one of them called, voice firm, step away from the water. Jimin gently pried his wrist from Jungkook's grip. The loss of contact felt like stepping off a cliff. This is where you stop following me, Jimin said. Jungkook shook his head, tears blurring his vision. I've never stopped. Jimin's smile was small and broken. That's what I was afraid of. He turned toward the approaching officers. For a moment, Jungkook thought his legs would give out. The world narrowed to the sound of footsteps on gravel, the metallic click of handcuffs being readied, the unbearable weight of everything unsaid. Then Jimin stopped. He looked back. One more truth, he said. The officers paused, exchanging glances. Jungkook's heart lurched. What now? Jimin's gaze locked onto his, fierce and unflinching. He wasn't the only one who saw us that night, Jimin said. The air seemed to collapse inward. Jungkook's breath caught. What do you mean? Jimin's voice dropped, each word deliberate. Someone else was there, watching, and they never came forward. A ripple of confusion passed through the officers. Jungkook's pulse thundered. Who? Jimin shook his head faintly. That's the part I never figured out. The revelation struck like lightning, sudden, blinding, splitting the past wide open. For years, Jungkook had believed the lake held only one secret. Now it held another. The officers stepped closer, their presence undeniable. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Jimin nodded. He didn't resist when they took his wrists. The click of the handcuffs echoed across the water, final and cold. Jungkook stood frozen, every instinct screaming to move, to speak, to undo what could no longer be undone. Jimin met his gaze one last time. The morning sun had fully risen, burning away the last of the mist. Nothing remained hidden now: the lake, the bicycle, the truth, the love that had survived lies and fear only to be shattered by honesty. As they led Jimin away, Jungkook finally understood something cruel and irreversible. Confessions didn't set you free. They simply changed the shape of your prison. And as the police car door closed, the sound echoed across the lake like the final note of a song neither of them had been brave enough to finish. The town turned Jimin into a headline before noon. Jungkook saw it on the cracked screen of his phone while sitting on the edge of his bed, still in mud-streaked clothes that smelled of lake water and regret. His fingers trembled as he scrolled past the flood of notifications, each one a new knife. Local youth confesses in Minkook case. Tragic accident or calculated cover-up. Secret relationship suspected. He dropped the phone onto the mattress as if it had burned him. "They know," he whispered to the empty room. "They know about us." Outside, a motorcycle roared past, followed by the murmur of neighbors gathering in tight, hungry clusters. Curtains shifted, doors opened and closed. The town was awake in a way it hadn't been in years, revived by scandal, fed by speculation. Jungkook dragged his hands over his face, nails scraping his skin. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jimin's wrists in metal cuffs, heard the flat finality of the car door slamming shut. And beneath that, a quieter terror. Someone else was there. The thought circled him like a predator. He stood abruptly, chair legs screeching against the floor. "If someone saw," he muttered, packing, "why didn't they come forward? Why wait until now? What are they waiting for?" His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, eyes bloodshot, lips pale, a thin crack running through the center of his composure. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He stared at it, dread pooling in his stomach, then answered. "Hello." Static crackled, then a voice, low and distorted, as if pushed through clenched teeth. "You should have let him run." Jungkook's blood went cold. "Who is this?" A soft laugh, not amused, not kind. "You really don't remember me." The line went dead. Jungkook stared at the screen, heart slamming so hard he felt it in his throat. His mind raced through faces, names, fragments of memory from that night. Laughter by the water, the glow of sunset, Minkook's angry voice, Jimin's panicked breathing. And something else. A shape in the trees. He staggered back, knocking into his desk, papers scattered like startled birds. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible." But the memory was there now, sharpened by fear. A figure half hidden behind the trunks, unmoving, watching. A witness. Or something worse. A knock slammed against his door. Jungkook flinched, chest heaving. "Who is it?" "Open up," came a familiar voice. "It's me." Taehyung. Relief and dread collided. Jungkook opened the door to find Taehyung standing in the hallway, hair uncombed, eyes storm-dark. "You look like hell," Taehyung said, pushing past him into the room. "Good morning to you too," Jungkook muttered. Taehyung turned, anger flashing. "Don't joke, not today." Jungkook shut the door slowly. "You've seen the news." "Everyone's seen it," Taehyung snapped. "They're saying he killed Minkook." "It was an accident." "That's not what the headlines say." Jungkook's hands curled into fists. "Since when do you trust headlines over people you know?" Taehyung's jaw tightened. "Since the people I know start confessing to things they hid for years." The accusation landed hard. Jungkook swallowed. "You think I knew?" I think you knew something, Taehyung said, voice quieter now but no less sharp. You two were inseparable, and suddenly Minyu disappears, and you both act like nothing happened. We were kids, Jungkook said. We were scared. Taehyung's gaze bored into him. Scared of what? Being judged or being caught? The question strung because it echoed Jungkook's own. Why are you here? Jungkook asked, exhaustion bleeding into his voice. Taehyung hesitated. For you, he said finally. Despite everything, you're still my friend, and because there's something you need to know. Jungkook's stomach twisted. What now? Taehyung looked toward the window, as if making sure no one was listening. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I saw someone leaving the lake that night. The room seemed to tilt. Jungkook's pulse roared. What? I was biking home, Taehyung continued. It was getting dark. I cut through the forest trail. I saw a figure ahead of me coming from the direction of the lake. They were in a hurry. I thought it was one of you, but when they passed under the streetlight. He swallowed. It was Jimin, and it was Minyu. The air left Jungkook's lungs in a sharp exhale. Why didn't you tell anyone? Taehyung's expression hardened. Because by the time I heard Minyu was missing, you and Jimin had already given your statements. You said you left before sunset. You said you saw nothing. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I imagined it. Or maybe you didn't want to get involved, Jungkook said. Taehyung flinched. You don't get to judge me for that, not after what you've been hiding. Silence thickened between them. Did you recognize them? Jungkook asked. Taehyung hesitated. No, they had their hood up, but I remember one thing. What? They were carrying something, Taehyung said. Something long, wrapped in cloth. Jungkook's heart hammered. A shovel. I don't know, Taehyung said. Maybe I told myself it was none of my business. I went home. I forgot about it until today. The room felt too small, the walls pressing inward. Someone else had been there, someone who left after the fall, someone carrying something that suggested intent, not accident. Jimin didn't kill him, Jungkook whispered. Taehyung's eyes searched his face. You're sure? I'm sure he believes he did, Jungkook said, but belief isn't the same as truth. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Your digging up the wrong grave. Jungkook's hands shook as he showed the screen to Taehyung. Taehyung's face drained of color. This isn't a joke. I know. A third message appeared. Come to the lake tonight, alone. Jungkook stared at the words, dread and fury intertwining. They want you back there, Taehyung said. They want to finish something, Jungkook replied. Or start it, Taehyung countered. Jungkook's reflection in the dark phone screen looked like someone standing at the edge of a decision that would change everything. I'm going, he said. Taehyung grabbed his arm. That's exactly what they want. And what do you want? Jungkook shot back. To sit here while Jimin takes the blame for something he might not have done alone, while someone who watched him bleed out walks free. Taehyung's grip tightened. I want you alive. Jungkook's voice softened, but the resolve in it was steel. Then help me make sure the truth is too. Outside, the town buzzed with rumor and judgment. Inside, the past clawed its way into the present, dragging secrets with it. And somewhere beyond the trees, the lake waited, silent, patient, ready to give up another truth or swallow them whole. Night fell like a verdict. By the time Jungkook reached the edge of the forest, the town's distant lights had faded into a dull glow behind him, swallowed by trees that whispered in a language older than guilt. The path to the lake was the same one he had walked 1,000 times, yet every step now felt like trespassing into a memory that did not want him back. He wasn't alone. He could feel it in the way the silence behaved, too careful, too deliberate, as if something were holding its breath just beyond the reach of sight. You came, the distorted voice said from the darkness. Jungkook didn't flinch this time. You knew I would. A figure emerged from between the trees, hood drawn low. The moonlight caught only fragments, the edge of a jaw, the pale arc of a cheek, hands shoved deep into pockets like weapons waiting to be drawn. Brave, the voice said, or stupid? Depends on who's telling the story, Jungkook replied. The lake lay behind the figure, a sheet of black glass reflecting a fractured sky. The air smelled of wet soil and something faintly metallic, as if the past itself had a scent and it had never left this place. You should have let him run, the figure repeated. And you should have called for help, Jungkook shot back, if you were there. A pause. Then a soft, humorless chuckle, straight to the point. Jimin always did like that about you. Jungkook's heart slammed. You knew we were here that night. I knew more than that. The figure stepped closer. Moonlight revealed familiar eyes, sharp, restless, too observant for comfort. Jimin, Jungkook breathed. The name tasted like betrayal. Jimin's lips curved, not quite a smile. Took you long enough. You disappeared after graduation, Jungkook said, mind racing. No goodbye, no explanation. I had my reasons, Jimin replied, same as everyone else in this town. Jungkook's fists clenched. You watched him die. Jimin's expression hardened. Careful, you're making assumptions. Then correct me, Jungkook demanded. Tell me why you were hiding in the trees. Tell me why you left with something wrapped in cloth. Tell me why you're texting me like this is some twisted game. The wind skimmed the lake, rippling its surface into broken reflections. I didn't kill Minyu, Jimin said. That's not what I asked. I didn't help him either, Jimin added, voice quieter now, and that's the part that keeps me awake. Jungkook felt the words hit somewhere deep, where his own guilt lived. Why were you there? He pressed. Jimin looked out over the water, because Minyu asked me to come. The revelation landed like a blow. What? He knew about you and Jimin, Jimin said. He was furious, said he was going to expose everything, but he wanted a witness, someone who could confirm he wasn't lying. Jungkook's stomach churned, so he brought you to watch us be destroyed. He brought me to watch him confront you, Jimin corrected. I stayed back. I thought maybe he'd calm down, maybe it would blow over. But it didn't. Jimin's jaw tightened. I saw the fight. I saw him fall. I heard the crack when his head hit the rock. Jungkook's breath came fast, and you did nothing. I froze, Jimin snapped, anger flashing. You think I'm proud of that? I watched Jimin try to wake him. I watched him panic. And when Minyu opened his eyes, his voice faltered. He looked straight toward where I was hiding, like he knew I was there. The night seemed to close in. What did he say? Jungkook whispered. Jimin swallowed. He said, don't let them pretend I didn't matter. Jungkook's chest constricted, grief clawing its way up his throat. I wanted to step forward, Jimin continued. I swear I did, but then I saw Jimin look at you like you were the only thing anchoring him to the world, and I knew if I stepped out, everything would explode, your families, the school, the town. I told myself it wasn't my place. So you left, Jungkook said, voice hollow. I left, Jimin admitted, and I took the bloodied cloth Jimin dropped when he tried to stop the bleeding. Jungkook stared at him. You took it. I panicked, Jimin said. I thought if someone found it, they'd know it wasn't just an accident. They'd see how long he bled, how long we all stood there doing nothing. The truth settled like ash. You hid evidence, Jungkook said. So did Jimin, Jimin shot back. So did you, by believing what was convenient. The accusation cut deeper than Jungkook expected. I didn't know, he said. You didn't ask, Jimin replied. Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of shared failure. Why come back now? Jungkook asked. Why the messages? Why drag this out? Jimin's gaze flicked toward the trees, then back to Jungkook. Because Jimin's confession isn't the whole truth, and if he goes down alone, the rest of us get to keep pretending we're innocent. A branch snapped somewhere behind Jungkook. He spun around, Taehyung, I told you to stay. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Then another. Police. Jungkook, a voice called, step away from him. Jimin cursed under his breath, you brought them. I came alone, Jungkook said, panic rising. I swear. Jimin's eyes narrowed, then someone else wanted us found. The realization hit them at the same time. They were not the only ones carrying secrets. The officers advanced, lights glaring, hands near their holsters. Both of you, where we can see you. Jungkook raised his hands slowly, heart hammering. We're unarmed. Jimin hesitated, then did the same. As the police closed in, Jungkook's mind raced. If Jimin was telling the truth, then Jimin wasn't alone in his guilt, but he also wasn't alone in his innocence. The narrative the town had already accepted was cracking. And someone had just made sure the cracks were visible to everyone. An officer stepped forward, recognition flashing in his eyes. Jungkook, you shouldn't be here. I could say the same to you, Jungkook replied, voice unsteady but defiant. The officer's gaze shifted to Jimin. We've been looking for you. Jimin's shoulders tensed. I figured. For obstruction of justice, the officer continued, and for withholding evidence in an active investigation. Jungkook's breath caught. You knew. We found the cloth, the officer said. Anonymous tip. Jimin let out a bitter laugh. Of course. Jungkook's mind spun. Someone had orchestrated this, exposing Jimin, cornering them at the lake, ensuring the truth surfaced in the most explosive way possible. But who? As the officers moved to cuff Jimin, he met Jungkook's gaze, something like relief flickering beneath the fear. At least it's out now, he said. Jungkook swallowed hard, not all of it. Jimin's lips parted, as if he wanted to say more. But the handcuffs clicked shut, silencing whatever confession might have followed. The lake lay silent behind them, reflecting flashing red and blue lights that fractured across its surface like a shattered memory. And Jungkook realized with a cold, creeping certainty that the truth was no longer buried. It was surfacing, and it was far more complicated and far more damning than any of them had been brave enough to imagine. The interrogation room smelled like disinfectant and old fear. Jungkook sat alone at the metal table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched, staring at the faint scratches etched into the surface, names, dates, desperate marks left by people who had waited here before him, each line a silent testament to how quickly a life could fracture under fluorescent lights. The door opened with a soft click. Detective Han entered, a folder tucked beneath his arm, his expression unreadable in the harsh white glow. He wasn't old, but his eyes carried the weight of too many truths uncovered too late. You shouldn't be here, Han said, taking the seat across from Jungkook. Jungkook let out a humorless breath. That seems to be the theme lately. Han studied him for a long moment. You were warned to stay away from the lake. And you were already there, Jungkook countered. Funny how that works. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe respect, passed through Han's gaze. We received an anonymous tip, the detective said. Said 2 witnesses were meeting to coordinate their stories. Jungkook's stomach tightened. We weren't coordinating anything. No, Han said, you were unraveling. The word landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Jungkook leaned forward. Jimin told you about the cloth. Han nodded. He told us where he buried it. Blood traces confirmed it belonged to Minyu. Jungkook swallowed. Then you know Jimin tried to help him. We know he tried, Han replied. We also know he left. The quiet condemnation in his tone scraped against Jungkook's nerves. You weren't there, Jungkook said. You didn't see the panic, the fear. You didn't feel what it's like to be 15 and realize one mistake could destroy everyone you love. Han's gaze hardened. Fear doesn't absolve responsibility. No, Jungkook said, voice trembling, but neither does hindsight make you brave. The room fell silent. Han opened the folder, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed the lakeshore from years ago, taken during the initial search. The rocks, the waterline, a dark stain barely visible. "You said you left before sunset," Han said. "I believed that was the truth," Jungkook replied. "Believed," Han repeated, "or chose to believe." Jungkook's throat tightened. "Is there a difference when you're trying to survive?" Han didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out another photograph. This one made Jungkook's breath catch. A still image from Minyo's recovered phone video. Blurry, shaking. The lens pointed toward the ground, capturing fragments. Jimin's hands pressed against blood-soaked cloth, Minyo's weak breathing, a sliver of Jungkook's shoe at the edge of the frame. "I don't remember this," Jungkook whispered. "You were there longer than you think," Han said. The words struck like a blow. "No," Jungkook said, shaking his head. "I would remember." "Trauma distorts memory," Han replied. "Sometimes to protect us, sometimes to protect others." Jungkook's vision blurred as he stared at the image. The angle suggested he had been closer to Minyu than he'd ever allowed himself to recall. "Play it," he said hoarsely. Han hesitated, then turned the tablet toward him. The video crackled to life. Jimin's voice, frantic and breaking. "Stay with me, please stay with me." Minyu's breathing, wet, uneven. Then a whisper, barely audible. "Not alone." The camera shifted. For a split second, Jungkook saw his own hand reach into frame. He recoiled from the screen. "Stop." Han paused the video. "You touched him," the detective said quietly. Jungkook's hands began to shake. I thought I froze, I thought I ran." "You did run," Han said, "but not immediately." The room seemed to spin. "What did I do?" Jungkook whispered. Han studied him carefully. "That's what you need to tell me." Jungkook pressed his palms to his eyes, memories clawing their way back, fragmented, disjointed. The metallic smell of blood. Jimin shouting. Minyu's fingers twitching. And his own voice, small and terrified. "We have to call someone." Jimin's reply, "If we do, everything ends." Jungkook's chest heaved. "I argued with him," he said. "I told him we couldn't leave. I told him Minyu was still alive." Han's pen stilled, and Jungkook's voice broke. "And then Minyu looked at me, not Jimin, me, like he was asking me to choose." Silence pressed in, suffocating. "I couldn't," Jungkook whispered. "I couldn't choose between him and Jimin, between the truth and the life we'd built. I hated myself for even hesitating." Han's gaze softened just slightly. "What did you do?" "I stepped back," Jungkook said. "I told Jimin we'd go get help, that we'd come back with someone, but we didn't." The confession settled into the room like dust. "You left him," Han said. "We left him," Jungkook corrected, tears spilling freely now. "And I let Jimin carry the weight alone because it was easier than admitting I dropped it too." The detective closed the folder slowly. "Why tell me now?" Han asked. "Because he's about to pay for all of it," Jungkook said, "and the truth is that simple." Before Han could respond, the door opened again. Taehyung stood in the doorway, breathless, eyes wide, with something dangerously close to panic. "You need to turn on the news," he said. Han frowned. "This is a restricted." "Now," Taehyung insisted. Han hesitated, then reached for the remote mounted on the wall. The small television flickered to life, the volume low but urgent. A reporter stood near the lake, police tape fluttering behind her. "New evidence has surfaced suggesting the case may involve more individuals than previously believed. Authorities have confirmed an anonymous source provided materials indicating possible tampering with the original investigation." Jungkook's heart pounded. Anonymous source. Han's jaw tightened. The broadcast cut to a photograph. A younger version of Detective Han, standing at the original search site years ago, speaking to Minu's parents. Jungkook turned slowly toward him. You were there from the beginning. Han didn't deny it. You closed the case, Jungkook said, realization dawning. You ruled it an accidental fall. The evidence supported that, Han replied evenly. And the cloth, Jungkook pressed, the missing phone, the second set of footprints they mentioned back then. Han's silence was answer enough. Taehyung stared at him. You knew there were inconsistencies. I knew there wasn't enough to prove otherwise, Han said, and I knew what a public investigation into 3 minors would do to this town, to your families, to the victims' parents who wanted closure, not scandal. Jungkook's voice trembled with disbelief. So you buried the uncertainty. I preserved what peace I could, Han replied. At the cost of the truth, Taehyung shot back. Han's composure cracked just for a moment. The truth is rarely clean. It destroys more than it saves. Jungkook pushed back his chair, the metal legs screeching. You don't get to decide whose lives are acceptable collateral. And neither did you, Han said quietly. The words hit their mark. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. On the television, the reporter continued, her voice a distant hum. The lake behind her shimmered in the afternoon light, deceptively serene, as if it hadn't swallowed years of lies. Jungkook wiped his face, breathing unevenly. Jimin turned himself in because he couldn't live with what we did. Seungmin came forward because he couldn't live with what he didn't do. And you, he looked at Han, voice shaking with anger and grief, you let all of us believe the past was settled. Han met his gaze, weary and unflinching. The past is never settled, it waits. The truth of that settled like a weight in Jungkook's chest. He thought of Jimin in a holding cell, alone with his memories, of Seungmin in handcuffs, relief and fear tangled in his eyes, of Minu, whose last moments had been shaped by the hesitation of boys too young to understand the permanence of their choices, and of himself, standing at the center of it all, finally unable to pretend he had only been a bystander. Jungkook straightened, his voice steadier than he felt. Then it's time we stop waiting. Han watched him carefully. What are you saying? I'm giving a full statement, Jungkook said. Everything I remember, even the parts that make me complicit. Taehyung's breath hitched. Jungkook. I won't let him carry this alone anymore, Jungkook continued. Not Jimin, not anyone. Han studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Truth has consequences. I know, Jungkook said, so does silence. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the town. For years, those shadows had hidden what they were too afraid to face. Now, under unforgiving light, every secret was stepping forward. And this time, none of them were running. The holding cell was colder than Jungkook expected. Not the kind of cold that came from air conditioning, but the kind that seeped into bone, a sterile, indifferent chill that made every sound echo too loudly and every breath feel borrowed. He stood outside the bars, fingers curled around the metal, staring at Jimin sitting on the narrow bench inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jimin looked smaller here. Not physically, he was the same, but stripped of the quiet strength Jungkook had always leaned on. His shoulders were rounded, his hands clasped between his knees like he was holding himself together by force. You shouldn't be here, Jimin said at last, without looking up. Jungkook let out a soft, disbelieving breath. That's the first thing you say to me. Jimin's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's still true. Jungkook tightened his grip on the bars. I gave my statement. That got Jimin's attention. His head snapped up, eyes wide. Why? Because the truth doesn't belong to just one of us, Jungkook said, and I'm done letting you carry it alone. Jimin stood abruptly, the bench scraping against concrete. You think that helps me? You think adding your name to the report will make this easier? No, Jungkook said, voice steady. I think it will make it honest. Jimin laughed, sharp and humorless. Honesty is overrated in a courtroom. Maybe, Jungkook replied, but it matters to me, it always has. Jimin's jaw tightened. You should have protected yourself. I tried, Jungkook said quietly. It nearly destroyed me. Silence pressed in, heavy with everything they had avoided saying. Jimin stepped closer to the bars, close enough that Jungkook could see the faint purple shadows beneath his eyes. The tiny cut on his lower lip, he must have worried with his teeth. You don't understand what will happen, Jimin said. They'll dissect every message we ever sent, every photo, every rumor. They'll turn us into a spectacle. They already have, Jungkook replied. At least now the story won't be a lie. Jimin's voice dropped to a whisper. They're calling it a love triangle gone wrong. Jungkook flinched. That's not what it was. Try telling that to a town that feeds on scandal, Jimin said. They don't want the truth. They want something they can whisper about over dinner. Jungkook's chest tightened. Let them whisper. I'm done living in fear of their voices. Jimin searched his face, something fragile flickering in his eyes. You've changed. I had to, Jungkook said. You left me with no other choice. The words hung between them, not an accusation but a fact. Jimin's fingers curled around the bars, mirroring Jungkook's grip. Their hands were inches apart, separated by cold metal and years of silence. I thought I was saving you, Jimin said. I know, Jungkook replied. That's what makes it so hard to hate you. Jimin closed his eyes, his forehead resting briefly against the bars. Do you? Hate you, Jungkook swallowed. No, I hate what we did. I hate what we didn't do. I hate that Minyu died believing he didn't matter. Jimin's breath hitched. He did matter, Jimin whispered. He was loud and cruel and stubborn and alive. He deserved more than the way we left him. Jungkook felt tears sting his eyes. We were children. We were cowards, Jimin corrected. The word cut deep because it felt true. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Detective Han appeared at the far end, pausing when he saw them, giving them the fragile mercy of a few more minutes. Jimin noticed him and straightened. You should go. I'm not finished, Jungkook said. You need to be, Jimin replied. If you stay, you'll keep trying to fix something that can't be undone. I'm not trying to fix it, Jungkook said. I'm trying to face it with you. Jimin's composure wavered. Why? The question was raw, unguarded, almost childlike. Jungkook's voice softened. Because you faced it alone for years, and because I still. He stopped. Jimin's eyes searched his. Still what? The air between them felt too thin again, like that morning at the lake. Jungkook exhaled shakily. I still love you, and I don't know what to do with that. The confession settled into the space between them, heavier than any accusation. Jimin's grip on the bars tightened until his knuckles turned white. Don't say that here. Why not? It's the only place left where we're not pretending. Jimin's voice broke. You deserve someone who hasn't abandoned a dying boy. I deserve the truth, Jungkook said, and you're the only one who's finally given it to me. Jimin's shoulders shook once, a silent fracture. If I'm convicted, he said hoarsely, you'll have to live with loving a criminal. I already live with loving a coward, Jungkook replied softly, including myself. The words hung in the air, neither cruel nor kind, just honest. Jimin let out a broken laugh. We're a mess. We're human, Jungkook said. Detective Han approached, his footsteps measured. Time up. Jimin stepped back from the bars, the sudden distance feeling like a physical wound. Jungkook didn't move. Will he? Han met his gaze. The court will decide. That's not what I asked. Han's expression softened. He won't face this alone. Jimin looked at Jungkook, something like gratitude and sorrow tangled in his eyes. You should go home. Jungkook shook his head. Home doesn't exist the way it used to. Then build a new one, Jimin said, somewhere that isn't haunted by me. Jungkook's chest tightened. You're not a ghost. Not yet, Jimin replied. Han cleared his throat gently. Jimin. Jimin nodded and turned away, the movement final in a way Jungkook wasn't ready to accept. Jimin, Jungkook called. He paused but didn't turn. I'm not letting you disappear into this, Jungkook said. Whatever happens, I'll be here, not because you asked me to, because I choose to. Jimin's shoulders trembled. Don't wait for me, he said quietly. Jungkook's voice broke, too late. Han placed a hand on Jimin's shoulder, getting him down the corridor. The sound of retreating footsteps echoed long after he was gone. Jungkook stood alone by the bars, the cold metal imprinting into his palms, the weight of love and guilt and truth settling into something he couldn't yet name. Outside the station, the night air was sharp and alive with distant traffic and murmured conversations. The town was still watching, still whispering, still deciding who they were in the story unfolding. Jungkook stepped into the darkness anyway. For the first time, he wasn't running from what they had done. He was walking toward whatever came next, carrying the truth like a wound that refused to close, and the fragile, stubborn hope that from its pain, something honest might finally begin. The rain had not stopped since midnight, drumming against the cracked windows like impatient fingers demanding to be heard. Inside the dim apartment, the air was thick with the residue of words that had been said hours ago and the heavier weight of those that had not. Elena stood by the table, her hands trembling just enough to betray the composure she fought to maintain. Across from her, Adrian leaned against the wall, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor as though the truth might crawl out from between the tiles if he stared hard enough. You lied to me, she said at last, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through the silence. Adrian exhaled slowly, a hollow sound. I protected you. Don't dress it up like that, Elena snapped, stepping closer. You decided for me, you erased my choice. He pushed off the wall, anger flashing. If I had told you, you would have gone after them, and you would be dead. Maybe, she shot back, her eyes glistening, but at least I would have known who I was fighting. The thunder outside cracked like a gunshot. Neither of them flinched. For a moment, the only sound was the rain and their breathing, ragged, uneven, charged. Then Elena reached into her coat and threw a small envelope onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped near Adrian's hand. What is this? He asked, not touching it. Open it. He hesitated, then picked it up. Inside was a photograph, grainy, taken at night. 3 figures stood under a streetlight. One of them was unmistakably Elena. The second was Adrian. The third made his blood run cold. That's impossible, he whispered. That's what I thought, Elena said, her voice breaking. He's supposed to be dead. The man in the photograph, Victor, had been the ghost that haunted both of them for years. The betrayal that destroyed their families, the fire that took everything. They had watched the building collapse. They had mourned. They had sworn vengeance on ashes. Adrian's hand began to shake. Where did you get this? Someone slid it under my door this morning. No note, no explanation, just that. She paused, swallowing hard, and an address. He looked up, fear and fury colliding in his eyes. You went there, didn't you? Elena's silence was answer enough. You promised me, he said, his voice rising raw. No more reckless moves, no more secrets. She laughed bitterly. That's rich coming from you. Their eyes locked, years of trust fracturing in real time. He's alive, Adrian, she said, stepping closer until only inches separated them. Everything we built our lives on, every decision, every sacrifice, was based on a lie. How do you expect me to sit still? His voice dropped to a whisper. Because if he's alive, then this isn't over. And if this isn't over, they're watching every step, every word. You going there alone, he ran a hand through his hair, packing. You might have led them straight to us. The words hung in the air like poison. Elena's face drained of color. You think I would do that? I think grief makes people careless, he replied, instantly regretting it. Her hand struck him before he saw it coming. The sound echoed in the small room, shocking them both. Adrian didn't move, a red mark blooming across his cheek. "Don't you dare reduce this to grief," she said, her voice trembling with fury and pain. "You don't get to belittle what we lost." "I lost them too," he shouted, the dam breaking. "I lost my brother in that fire, I lost my home, I lost any chance at a normal life. Don't stand there and act like you're the only one bleeding." The room seemed to shrink around them, their shared trauma now a weapon turned inward. Elena's shoulders sagged, anger giving way to exhaustion. "Then why does it feel like I'm standing here alone?" Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came, because the truth was he had pulled away, piece by piece, secret by secret. He had convinced himself that distance was protection, that silence was sacrifice. Now he saw it for what it was, fear. A sudden knock at the door froze them both. 3 sharp raps. They stared at each other, dread blooming. "No one knows you're here," Adrian murmured. Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was sure whoever stood outside could hear it. Another knock, louder this time. "Adrian," a voice called through the door, muffled but unmistakable. "We need to talk." Adrian's face went ashen, Elena's breath caught. She knew that voice. "Victor!" Adrian shook his head, whispering, "It's a trap." The voice came again, calm, almost amused. "If it were a trap, you'd already be dead. Open the door. We have unfinished business, and you're running out of time." Elena's hand found Adrian's, their fingers intertwining instinctively despite everything. Years of love, betrayal, loyalty, and loss converged in that single touch. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "no more lies." He nodded, eyes locked with hers. "No more lies." Adrian moved toward the door, each step heavy with the weight of the past and the terror of what waited on the other side. His hand hovered over the knob. The rain stopped. Silence fell. And then he opened the door. The hallway light flickered as the door creaked open, casting a sickly yellow glow over the man standing there. Victor looked thinner than memory allowed, his face carved into sharp angles, eyes sunken yet burning with a strange, unshakable calm. Rainwater dripped from the hem of his coat, forming a dark halo around his boots, though the storm outside had fallen eerily silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Elena's fingers tightened around Adrian's hand until her knuckles blanched. "You're dead," she whispered, her voice barely sound. Victor's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth. "So I've been told." Adrian stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Elena. "You don't get to just appear here like a ghost and expect a conversation. Start explaining. Now." Victor's gaze flicked between them, measuring, calculating. "May I come in, or would you prefer the neighbors hear what you've been hiding for the past 6 years?" The threat landed with surgical precision. Adrian hesitated. Elena released his hand. "Let him in," she said, her voice steady in a way that frightened him more than her anger ever had. Victor entered slowly, as if he owned the space, his eyes scanning the apartment, the peeling paint, the stack of unopened letters, the photograph on the wall they had forgotten to take down. He stopped in front of it, a picture of the 3 of them taken long before the fire, before betrayal had rewritten their lives. "You kept this," Victor murmured. "It's a reminder," Elena replied, "of who you were before you decided our lives were expendable." Victor turned to face her fully. "If I wanted you dead, you would be." Adrian's fist slammed into the table. "Don't you dare talk like that in my home." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Your home? You mean the safe house provided by the same people who ordered the fire?" Silence detonated in the room. Elena stared at Adrian, confusion and horror blooming. What is he talking about? Adrian's face hardened. He's lying. Victor reached into his coat slowly. Adrian tensed, ready to lunge, but Victor only produced a thin file and dropped it onto the table, the same table that had held their secrets hours earlier. The folder spilled open, revealing documents stamped with official seals, surveillance photos, transaction logs. Elena's eyes darted across the pages, her breathing growing shallow. Adrian, these payments your name. I can explain, he said quickly, too quickly. Victor's voice cut in, smooth and merciless. He made a deal, immunity in exchange for cooperation. He fed them information about our movements, our contacts, our families. That's not true, Adrian shouted, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. Elena looked up, tears already spilling. Tell me he's lying. Adrian reached for her, but she stepped back as if his touch burned. I did what I had to do, he said, his voice breaking. They had you on a list. You were next. I thought if I cooperated, I could keep you alive. You let them kill my parents, she whispered. I didn't know they would go that far. You knew who they were. Her scream shattered the fragile air between them. You knew what they were capable of, and you gave them everything. Victor watched, silent, almost reverent, as the truth ripped them apart. Adrian's eyes glistened. Every day since that night, I've lived with it. Every breath I take feels stolen. I stayed because leaving you alone with that pain would have destroyed you. Elena laughed through her tears, the sound jagged and unrecognizable. Destroyed me? Look at me, Adrian, I am destroyed. The words hung like smoke. Victor stepped forward, his presence a dark gravity pulling them back into orbit. You're both asking the wrong question. They turned toward him, fury momentarily aligned. The question isn't who betrayed whom, he continued. It's why you were targeted in the first place. Adrian's jaw tightened. We were collateral damage. Victor shook his head slowly. No, you were leverage. Elena's voice trembled. Leverage for what? Victor's eyes locked onto hers. For you. The room seemed to tilt. You were never just a witness, Elena, he said. Your mother wasn't just a teacher. She was an auditor for a private security contractor funneling weapons into conflict zones. She found the discrepancies. She prepared to expose them. They couldn't buy her silence, so they planned to erase her. Elena staggered back, hitting the wall. No, she would have told me. She told me everything. Victor's expression softened for the first time. She told you bedtime stories and how to bake bread. She did not tell you about the death threats. Adrian stared at Elena, the pieces rearranging into a cruel new picture. The list, your name was first because you had copies, didn't you? Elena's mind raced, fragments of memory clawing to the surface. Late-night phone calls, her mother's trembling hands, the locked drawer she had been forbidden to open. Victor nodded. She hid the files with someone she trusted. The silence stretched. Elena's lips parted. With you. Victor did not deny it. Adrian let out a hollow laugh. So this entire time, the man we thought destroyed us was actually protecting the evidence that could bring them down. Protecting it, Victor corrected quietly, and waiting for the moment you were strong enough to survive the truth. Elena slid down the wall, her knees giving way. My whole life, a lie. Adrian moved toward her instinctively, then stopped, unsure if he still had the right. Elena. She looked up at him, eyes raw. Did you ever plan to tell me about the deal, about the list, about any of it? His silence was answer enough. Victor checked his watch, an oddly mundane gesture amid the wreckage of their lives. We don't have the luxury of more confessions. They know I'm here. They know you've seen the file. By morning, this building will be ash. Adrian's head snapped up. You're certain? Victor met his gaze. I've been running from them for 6 years. Certainty is the only thing they've given me. Elena pushed herself to her feet, wiping her tears with trembling hands. Then we stopped running. Adrian stared at her. You can't be serious. I am done being prey, she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. If they want the files, they come through us, and this time we're ready. Victor studied her, something like pride flickering in his tired eyes. Your mother said you would say that. Adrian let out a slow breath, the weight of guilt still crushing his chest, but something else rising beneath it, resolve. If we do this, there's no turning back. Elena met his gaze. There never was. Outside, in the distance, Sirens began to wail, too many, too synchronized to be coincidence. Victor moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. Red and blue lights painted the wet streets in violent color. "They're early," he murmured. Adrian grabbed the file, shoving the documents into a bag with shaking hands. "Fire escape." "Blocked," Victor said. "They'll herd us down the main stairwell." Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. "Then we don't go down." Both men looked at her. She managed a grim, defiant smile. "We go up." A heavy thud echoed from the hallway, followed by shouted commands and the splintering crack of a door being forced open somewhere below. Adrian slung the bag over his shoulder. "Roof access is locked." Victor pulled a small set of keys from his pocket, the metal glinting. "Not anymore." Elena took a steadying breath, the fear still there but no longer paralyzing. Between the man who had betrayed her to save her and the man who had vanished to protect the truth, she stood at the center of a storm that had been building her entire life. "Whatever happens up there," she said, her voice fierce despite the tears still on her cheeks, "we finish this together." Another crash shook the building. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Adrian opened the apartment door, the corridor now filled with smoke and shouting. He looked back at Elena, at Victor, at the life that had burned once already. "Together," he said. And they ran toward the roof, the past chasing them, the truth in their hands, and the night ready to decide which of them would survive the dawn. Dawn arrived not as light, but as a slow bleeding of gray across the horizon, the sky paling above the city like a bruise finally fading. The rooftop gravel bit through the thin soles of Elena's shoes as she stumbled forward, lungs burning, the metallic taste of fear and smoke coating her tongue. Behind them, the stairwell door shuddered under the weight of fists and boots, each der a countdown. Victor moved with practiced efficiency, locking the rooftop access behind them and jamming the handle with a bent length of pipe. It would not hold for long. Nothing ever did. Wind tore across the open roof, snapping Elena's hair across her face. She pushed it away and stared at the city that had raised her, betrayed her, and tried to erase her. Sirens wailed below, but up here there was a strange, suspended quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Adrian dropped the bag beside the low concrete ledge, his hands shaking so badly he had to try twice before he could unzip it. Papers spilled out, fluttering like wounded birds before Victor pinned them under his palm. "Tell me we didn't come up here to die," Adrian said, his voice raw. Victor glanced toward the eastern skyline. "No, we came up here to be seen." Elena followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing but rooftops and water towers. Then, faintly, the thrum of rotors reached her, distant, growing. "A helicopter?" Adrian asked. Victor nodded. "A journalist, one of the few who couldn't be bought. Your mother sent her the first fragments years ago. I sent the rest last night." Elena's chest tightened. "You planned this." "I planned for the possibility that you would choose to stop running," Victor corrected. "She believed you would." A thunderous bang reverberated from the stairwell door. The pipe bent, dust rained from the frame. Adrian let out a strained laugh. "They're not here to negotiate." Elena stepped closer to the ledge, the drop yawning below. The wind carried the smell of rain-soaked asphalt and something sharper, fuel, heat, the promise of fire. She thought of her mother's hands kneading dough, of her father's quiet humming, of the night everything burned, and the years she had spent trying to live in the ashes. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly without turning. "Either of you?" The question hung between them. Adrian answered first. "Every day, I regret that I thought I could bargain with monsters. I regret that I chose fear over truth. And I regret that the price was your trust." His voice broke. "But I don't regret loving you, not once." Elena closed her eyes, the words cutting deeper than any accusation. Victor spoke more quietly. "I regret surviving when she did not. I regret the years you spent believing you were alone. But I do not regret keeping the truth alive, even when it cost me my name, my face, my life." Another crash, the pipe snapped. The door buckled inward, splintering under the force. The helicopter's roar grew louder now, the chop of blades slicing through the dawn. Elena looked up as it crested the neighboring buildings, its searchlight sweeping across rooftops before locking onto them. Wind exploded outward, whipping papers into a frenzy, the documents lifting and swirling like a storm of white wings. Victor grabbed Elena's arm. Now. He pulled a flare from his coat and struck it. Red fire bloomed in his hand, smoke streaming upward in a violent ribbon. Adrian scrambled to gather the scattered pages, shoving them back into the bag before slinging it across his chest. The stairwell door gave way with a deafening crack. Armed figures spilled onto the roof, weapons raised, voices sharp with command. "Drop the bag on the ground now." The helicopter hovered closer, the downdraft nearly knocking Elena off her feet. A rope ladder unfurled, slapping against the gravel. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Elena looked at the men advancing toward them, faces hidden behind visors, fingers tightening on triggers. She looked at Adrian, at the guilt etched into every line of him, and at Victor, whose life had been reduced to shadows and waiting. Then she looked at the rising sun, its first true beam breaking over the horizon and striking the rooftop in a wash of pale gold. "Go," Victor urged. "You're the story, you're the proof they can't erase." Adrian shook his head. "We're not leaving you." Victor's expression softened, something like peace settling over his worn features. "This was never about me." Gunfire cracked, sharp and deafening. Concrete exploded near their feet. Elena grabbed Adrian's hand. "Together," she said, the word no longer a plea but a vow. They ran for the ladder. Victor followed, covering them, the flare still blazing in his fist like a defiant star. Bullets tore through the air, one grazing Adrian's shoulder, spinning him, but Elena held on, hauling him forward with a strength born of grief and fury and love. The ladder swung wildly as they climbed. Hands reached down from above, journalists, not soldiers, pulling them into the helicopter's open belly. Adrian collapsed against the metal floor, clutching the bag to his chest as if it were a beating heart. "Elena," Victor's voice rose from below. She turned. He stood alone on the roof now, the armed men closing in, the flare's red smoke coiling around him like a shroud. For a moment, the world narrowed to his face, no longer hard, no longer haunted, but resolute. He gave a small, almost amused salute. The helicopter lurched upward. "Elena," Adrian shouted, reaching for her as she leaned out the open door, the wind tearing tears from her eyes. Below, Victor dropped the flare. It struck the scattered fuel canister near the stairwell, something Elena had not even noticed in the chaos. Fire erupted in a sudden, consuming bloom, forcing the advancing men back, buying seconds, then more. The rooftop vanished into smoke and flame as the helicopter climbed into the newborn light. Elena's scream was swallowed by the roar of the rotors. Hours later, the footage would flood every channel, documents held up to the camera, names read aloud, accounts exposed, the machinery of quiet wars dragged into the open. There would be denials, outrage, arrests. There would be threats. But there would also be truth, stubborn, irreversible. And in a small, borrowed apartment far from the burning rooftop, Elena would sit by a window at dawn, Adrian asleep in the next room, the city hushed beneath a fragile peace. She would hold a photograph rescued from the file, a picture of her parents, younger than she remembered, smiling at something beyond the frame. For the first time in years, the air would feel thin not from fear, but from the sheer, unbearable vastness of what came next. She would open the window and breathe.